All right, let's dive right in, shall we? You and I are going deep into regenerative agriculture today.
I'm excited to see what we uncover.
Yeah, and looks like you've already gotten a head start. You even brought your own handbook.
Well, yeah, it helps to have all the details. And I'm ready to get practical, put this knowledge to work.
Makes sense. And that's exactly what we're doing today, especially with that Chapter 7 you've got marked up. Practical applications and tools. Feels like a real toolbox for a sustainable future.
It is a toolbox for sure, full of techniques and strategies that anyone can use, whether you're a seasoned farmer or just starting a little garden.
Love it. So let's crack it open, shall we? Subchapter 7.1, Techniques for Farmers and Practitioners. You even highlighted a section about soil health.
Yeah, well, soil health is the foundation, isn't it? And I've been battling some compaction issues lately, so those techniques are really calling out to me.
Oh, I can imagine. Trying to grow anything in compacted soil is like...
Like trying to plant in concrete. The handbook talks about reducing tillage, though, which makes sense.
Right, so are we saying goodbye to those giant plows?
Not necessarily saying goodbye, but definitely using them less. Less tillage means we're disturbing the soil structure less, letting those microbes do their thing.
It's like treating the soil as a living being, right? Not just dirt.
Exactly. And speaking of feeding those microbes, you mentioned being interested in composting?
Oh, yeah. My compost bin is practically begging for those kitchen scraps and yard waste.
Perfect. Composting is basically like making a 5-star meal for your soil, all those nutrients, breaking down naturally.
And then those nutrients go right back to the plants. But what about keeping the soil covered? I saw that bare soil is on the no-no list in the handbook.
Rightly so. Bare soil is vulnerable, susceptible to erosion, drying out, temperature swings. That's where cover crops come in.
Ah, yes. And I remember you talking about planting a mix of legumes and grasses. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, legumes, like clover, they work magic, pulling nitrogen right out of the air and putting it into the soil. Grasses, they're all about those deep roots, preventing erosion, improving the soil's structure.
A powerful combo. It's like having a living blanket, protecting and feeding the soil at the same time.
It really is. And I think that idea of diversity ties in well with something else you underlined. Polyculture.
Oh, yeah. I was intrigued by that. Planting different crops together instead of just rows and rows of the same thing.
Exactly. It creates the stronger, more resilient ecosystem, naturally helping to control pests and diseases. And of course, it's a buffet for all those beneficial insects and pollinators.
Imagine a field with corn growing alongside beans and squash, attracting all sorts of life.
Exactly. A vibrant mix. And when you bring diversity into the picture, you can't forget about livestock.
That's right. I know you've been thinking about incorporating animals. The handbook mentions rotational grazing, right?
Yeah. It's all about mimicking how herbivores naturally graze, moving them from one section of pasture to the next, prevents overgrazing, actually helps stimulate plant growth, and improves soil health.
It's a win-win for the land and the livestock.
Exactly. Now, speaking of wins, I know water conservation is a big priority for you.
Huge priority, especially with the weather being so unpredictable these days. And luckily, Subchapter 7.1 has a whole section on water management.
It does. And remember how we talked about healthy soil being like a sponge? Well, that's crucial for water management. It can hold so much more water than degraded soil.
So everything we've talked about so far, reducing tillage, composting, cover crops, it all contributes to better water retention.
It all ties together. And in the handbook, you marked a section on contour farming, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I was really drawn to that technique. It's like landscaping, but for farming.
It is. It's about working with the land's natural contours, planting crops along the slopes and curves, which helps slow down water runoff.
Like creating little speed bumps for the water so it has time to soak in.
Exactly. And then you also have more active techniques like drip irrigation, which you were curious about.
I was. It seems so much more efficient than traditional sprinklers, just delivering water right to the roots.
It is. Targeted and efficient, making every drop count. But with all these techniques, the big question is, how do we know if they're actually working?
That's where monitoring comes in, right? Subchapter 7.2, Monitoring and Evaluation Strategies. Let's talk tools.
All right, let's do it. First up, soil health. You mentioned using a basic soil test kit, but have you considered getting a more in-depth analysis? I know you've heard of the Haney test.
I have. What makes that one so special?
Well, it goes beyond just the basics, like nitrogen and phosphorus. It dives into the biological activity, giving you a complete picture of your soil's health.
It's like getting a full physical for your soil.
Exactly. And with your focus on improving soil structure and microbial activity, that kind of in-depth analysis can be a game changer.
Sounds like a must-have. And then, of course, there's biodiversity. You mentioned being fascinated by beneficial insects and pollinators.
Oh, absolutely. Monitoring biodiversity is a great way to gauge the overall health of your ecosystem. The handbook even suggests simple things like setting up insect traps.
So I can embrace my inner entomologist.
You got it. It's actually quite fun, and it gives you valuable information to guide habitat management and pest control.
It's like becoming a detective for your farm's ecosystem.
Mm.
But beyond bug hunting, what else should we be monitoring?
Water usage, of course. You want to be as efficient as possible with irrigation, so keeping track of your water consumption is key.
Are there any particular tools or techniques for that?
Soil moisture sensors are great. They help you figure out how much water your plants actually have access to. No more guessing with your irrigation schedule.
Taking the guesswork out, making it all data-driven. I like it.
Data is power. And speaking of data, there's carbon sequestration, that amazing benefit of regenerative agriculture.
Right. I was wondering how we actually quantify how much carbon is being stored in the soil.
There are a few ways. Traditional soil testing can measure carbon content, but there are also some really cool high-tech methods in development using sensors and remote sensing.
Wow, it's like having a carbon counting speedometer for your farm.
It is. And the important thing to remember is that monitoring is ongoing. It's not a one-time thing. You need to keep checking in on soil health, water usage, biodiversity, carbon sequestration.
So it's all about gathering data, analyzing it, and using it to guide your decisions about how to manage your farm.
Precisely. And speaking of data, we can't forget about the economics of it all. You mentioned being concerned about the financial viability of regenerative agriculture, and that's a smart thing to consider.
Absolutely. Farming is a business, and it needs to be profitable. Subchapter 7.2 also talks about economic and yield analysis. What should we be paying attention to?
We need to track input costs, things like seeds, fertilizer, labor, fuel. Then we compare those costs to our yields, both in quantity and quality. It's about finding that sweet spot where we're producing high-quality food in a way that's good for the planet and the bottom line.
So it's about sustainability, AD profitability.
Exactly. And the research shows that regenerative agriculture can be just as profitable, if not more so, than conventional agriculture.
That's encouraging to hear. Now, we've gone through techniques, monitoring, and economic considerations, but I want to make sure our listeners have the resources they need to continue learning. That's where subchapter 7.3 comes in, resources and further learning. It seems like a treasure trove of information.
It is. It's packed with connections to organizations, networks, websites, blogs, podcasts, all sorts of resources to keep learning and growing.
Amazing. So many ways to connect with other people who are passionate about regenerative agriculture.
Exactly. And you mentioned wanting to connect with other regenerative farmers in your area.
Yeah, I was hoping the handbook might have some leads on that.
It does. There are a few organizations listed that are active in your region, including a local chapter of the Savory Institute and a network of regenerative farmers who hold regular workshops and field days.
Wow. It's one thing to read about these techniques, but it's another thing to see them in action, to learn from people who are doing it successfully.
Hands-on experience is invaluable, and that's part of what makes regenerative agriculture so appealing, don't you think? It's not just theory, it's a way of life.
It's about getting your hands dirty, literally and figuratively, and reconnecting with the land.
Exactly. That connection is so important, understanding how everything is connected, from the soil to the plants, to the animals, to the people who depend on them.
A whole systems approach.
Exactly.
So I have a question. What about those of us who aren't farmers? How can we support regenerative agriculture?
That's a great question. I think one of the most powerful things we can do is vote with our wallets. Seek out food that's been grown using regenerative practices. Support those farmers who are doing the right thing.
So look for labels like regenerative organic or pasture raised when I'm grocery shopping.
Yes, but it goes beyond labels too. Get to know your local farmers, visit farmers markets, ask questions about how their food is produced, build relationships, become a more conscious consumer.
I love that. And what about just talking about regenerative agriculture with friends and family?
Exactly. Spread the word. The more people are aware of this movement, the more demand there will be for regenerative products, which encourages more farmers to adopt these practices.
It's a ripple effect.
It is. And you know, even if you don't have acres and acres of land, you can still practice regenerative principles in your own backyard.
My little patio garden can make a difference.
Absolutely. Even a small garden can be a haven for biodiversity, a source of nutritious food. Composting, cover cropping, minimizing soil disturbance. Those principles apply at any scale.
It's about bringing those regenerative principles home.
Exactly. And who knows, you might even inspire your neighbors.
That's a great point. Imagine a world where every backyard is a little regenerative ecosystem.
That's a beautiful vision. And, it's important to acknowledge that transitioning to regenerative agriculture can have its challenges. It's a journey, not a destination.
You even highlighted a section in the handbook about potential obstacles and how to overcome them, so there must be some bumps along the way.
There are. It can be a steep learning curve. There might be upfront costs. And for farmers who've been doing things the conventional way for years, it's a real shift in mindset.
Unlearning old habits, embracing a whole new way of thinking.
Exactly. But you don't have to do it all at once. You can start small, experiment, see what works for you in your context.
It's a process, learning as you go.
It is, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more to discuss on that front. But for now, maybe it's a good place to pause, catch our breath before we dive into the next chapter.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the world of regenerative agriculture. So much to unpack with regenerative agriculture, it feels like we're just getting started.
We are. It's a deep dive, remember, and we've got so much more to explore.
True. So before the break, you mentioned hands-on experience being super valuable.
Absolutely. Nothing beats seeing these techniques in action, right?
Right. And speaking of action, you mentioned those organizations in my region, the ones doing workshops and field days.
Oh, yeah. Those are great resources, especially for getting that hands-on learning. The Savory Institute chapter and that network of region farmers are both really active in your area.
Perfect. Because it's one thing to read about it, but seeing it firsthand, learning from those experienced folks, that's got to be incredible.
It is, and it really reinforces that regenerative ag isn't just some abstract concept. It's a way of life, a way of interacting with the land.
Getting your hands dirty, literally.
Yeah.
And I think that connection to the land is something a lot of people crave these days.
For sure. It's about understanding that interconnectedness, how everything's linked. The soil, the plants, the animals, us.
It all comes full circle.
It does. Which brings up a question you had about those of us who aren't farmers. How can we support this movement?
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to know that. How to get involved even without a farm.
Well, there's a lot we can do. One big thing is, simply put, voting with our wallets. Seeking out food that's been grown using regenerative practices, supporting those farmers who are doing the hard work.
So I should be looking for labels like regenerative organic or pasture raised.
Those are good starting points, but it goes deeper than that. Get to know those local farmers, visit their farms, chat with them at the farmers markets.
Building those relationships.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about regenerative agriculture. Share it with your friends, family, get people curious.
Spread the word. Because the more people know about it, the more demand there will be, the more farmers will feel empowered to make the shift.
It's a ripple effect, for sure. And, even without a farm, you can still bring those principles into your own backyard.
Even my little patio garden.
Absolutely. Every little bit counts. Think composting, cover cropping, minimizing soil disturbance, all those things we've been talking about.
Scaling it down to fit any space.
Exactly. And who knows, you might just inspire a whole neighborhood.
That's a cool thought. Imagine a world where every backyard is like a mini regenerative ecosystem.
Love that idea.
Yeah.
But we also need to be realistic. Shifting to regenerative ag, it can be tough. There are going to be challenges.
You highlighted that section in the handbook about obstacles and how to overcome them. So what are some of those bumps in the road?
Well, there's definitely a learning curve. It takes time to understand these systems. And there can be upfront costs, investing in new equipment or making changes to your infrastructure. And, for farmers who've been doing things a certain way for a long time, changing that mindset, it's not easy.
It's like unlearning those old habits and embracing a whole new way of thinking.
It is. But the key is to remember you don't have to do everything all at once. Start small, experiment, find what works for you, for your specific farm or garden.
Baby steps.
Exactly. Now, we also can't ignore the critics. There are folks out there who say regenerative agriculture is just a fad, that it can't really feed the world.
You mentioned that in your notes, too. I think it's important to address those concerns head on.
It is. First of all, regenerative agriculture is backed by science, by a growing body of evidence. It's not just some feel-good story.
The data's there to support it.
It is. As for feeding the world, it's true that regenerative agriculture requires a different approach than that industrial model we're used to. It's not about squeezing every last ounce of yield out of the land. It's about creating balance, resilience, thinking long-term.
It's a shift in perspective, a paradigm shift.
Exactly. And that kind of shift takes time It takes effort, but it's absolutely essential if we want to create a truly sustainable food system, one that nourishes people and the planet.
It's an investment in our future.
It is. And it goes beyond just feeding people. It's about nourishing them with food that's not only abundant, but also full of flavor, full of nutrients, food that's grown with respect for the land, for the animals, for the people who grow it.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that, to demand that from their food.
The awareness is growing.
It is. And that's what gives me hope that we can shift this system, create something better.
It's inspiring. And on that note, I think we need to take another quick break. We'll be back soon to wrap up our deep dive into regenerative agriculture. All right, we're back, ready to wrap up our exploration of regenerative agriculture.
I'm ready. It's been a fascinating journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has. We've talked techniques, monitoring, resources, even tackled some of those challenges head on.
A lot to cover. But I think it's important to step back now, look at the bigger picture, the why behind all this.
Absolutely. And you actually highlighted something in the handbook that really struck me. It's about regenerative ag being more than just growing food. It's about healing the planet.
It is. It's about tackling those huge issues like climate change, food security, biodiversity loss. Regenerative agriculture has the potential to make a real difference.
It's like when we heal the soil, we're healing everything, ourselves included.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sequestering carbon in the soil, that's a huge step in the right direction for climate change. Healthier soils and ecosystems, that leads to greater food security, more resilience in the face of, well, anything.
It's a win-win-win. But, in your notes, you brought up a concern about large-scale agriculture. Can regenerative practices really be scaled up to feed a growing population?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's true, this kind of shift, it needs more than just individual efforts. We need policies that support it, consumer demand that drives it, infrastructure that makes it all possible.
We need to create an environment where regenerative ag can flourish.
Exactly. We can't keep relying on that old industrial model. It's just not sustainable. We need something new, something better.
We need a food system that's truly resilient, truly equitable.
Couldn't agree more. And regenerative agriculture, it offers that path forward.
I love that. So I'm curious, what's your vision for the future of regenerative ag? What does success look like to you?
Well, for me, success is when regenerative ag is the norm, not the exception. When farmers are recognized as the stewards of the land they are, when consumers have that deep connection to where their food comes from, and when communities are thriving because of it, because they have access to healthy, affordable, sustainably produced food.
That's a beautiful vision. A world where everyone's winning.
It is. And it's not a pipe dream, it's achievable. But it's going to take all of us working together.
It's about making conscious choices every single day.
Absolutely. Supporting those regenerative farmers, putting those principles into practice in our own gardens, speaking up, advocating for change.
We all have a part to play.
We do. And I think it's a movement worth fighting for.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that just about wraps up our deep dives into regenerative agriculture for today. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired.
Me too. It's exciting to see so much passion, so much innovation happening in this space.
It's more than just farming. It's a way of life, a way of thinking.
It is. And it's a path that's open to all of us. Farmers, gardeners, eaters, concerned citizens. We can all be a part of this.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected to each other, to the land, to this planet.
And that even small actions, those little choices we make every day, they can add up to big change.
So to all our listeners out there, let's get out there. Let's plant those seeds of change, literally and figuratively. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time.